Ladies and gentlemen, it's the Mythicist Milwaukee Show. I am your host, Rob Moore. With me, as always, is Brian Kester as we keep a all-seeing eye of Horus on the secular movement. Say hi, Brian.
Hi, Brian. I'm excited to have an in-studio guest. I'm pretty fired up of good importance, and we need to get the story out.
We really do, and I want to take a few minutes to explain what we do a little bit, because it occurs to us all that today we might have a different listening audience than normal. We do concentrate mainly on the secular movement, but mythicism, if I may define it for a moment, is really just the study of ancient religions and mythologies as they relate to the continuing dogma of religions that exist today. The basic premise is that Christ and other historical figures never actually existed, as contrary to popular belief, even among atheists. The Jesus myth theory, the Christ myth theory, and mythicism in general has had a hard time gaining ground. And modern researchers who have no axe to grind, i.e. those who can look at it objectively without coming from the Judeo-Christian background, are beginning to assert quite forcefully that there is no and never has been any evidence for the existence of any of these biblical figures throughout antiquity. And that's really all we're interested in from a research point of view. Although we do keep an eye on atheism and secularism, we are not about debating the existence of God on this show. And in fact, we welcome liberal religious thinkers to join the conversation. Isn't that right, Brian?
That's right. And we're not here to convert you, but rather to discuss and get things out.
And the fact is that Mythicist Milwaukee is chiefly concerned with peace and prosperity of the planet going forward, and true pluralism, which we don't really have in the world. The great secular nation has become one where religion is inserted itself into government regularly, and that topic will come up today as part of the conversation as well. But what we're really about is tolerance, acceptance, and understanding between people of different faiths and people of no faith. And in fact, we feel as secularists that we're among the only groups that really care about true pluralism and true freedom of religion, which of course includes freedom from religion in our case. So we invite all of our guests, whether you're a first-time listener or whether you've been involved for a long time, to weigh in on today's show. We welcome a very important guest in studio, kind of rare for us, so we won't have any internet difficulties with the call-in today. Peter Isely is with us. He's a founding member and longtime Midwest director of SNAP. Of course, that's the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, the world's oldest organization of survivors of childhood rape and sexual assault by clergy, with over 18,000 survivors in hundreds of chapters worldwide. That's really a big number, and of course, it's probably just the tip of the iceberg, as we're going to find out. A graduate of Harvard Divinity School, Peter is a psychotherapist in private practice right here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Also a treat for us to have a local guy on the program. He established the nation's only inpatient hospital program for victims of clergy sexual abuse, and we're going to talk about that too, because I think that's a fascinating thing. A frequent spokesperson and media guest, Peter's story and work has been featured nationally and internationally, including in several award-winning documentary films. His current project is the Milwaukee-based Survivors and Clergy Leadership Alliance, or SCLA, an innovative partnership of survivors and clergy working to end sexual violence in the church. Peter was the 2014 recipient of Harvard University's Reverend Peter J. Gomes Distinguished Alumni Honors, the 2012 Public Service Award, and the National Association of Social Workers, and the 2010 Thomas P. Cannon Equal Justice Award of the Legal Aid Society. Please welcome Peter Isely. What's going on, Peter?
Hi.
You got to talk right into the microphone, I'm afraid, my friend. We'd have
Once again, hello.
cut rate equipment here, so you got to speak up.
But we're above TJ Maxx, so I can grab a sweater.
We are above the TJ Maxx in downtown Milwaukee at the Grand Avenue Mall. And it is winter, so you might need a sweater. Take us right to the beginning. Peter, you are originally from Milwaukee, originally from Boston. How's it go?
I'm actually originally from Fond du Lac, Wisconsin.
He's a Fond du Lac guy, yes, the source of the lake. It's Lake Winnebago, yes?
Correct, yeah. The walleye
South
weekend
End.
Right.
of the world.
And you were a member of your church there. You were
I was raised in St. Joseph's Parish in Fond du Lac, and there's 8 children in our family, and I'm a twin. And my father died in a car crash when I was 9 months old. My oldest brother was 13, and extremely Catholic family. Monsignor Reardon was the pastor of the parish. The thing about Monsignor Reardon, he was there for like 40 years, and he had a priest ordained out of that parish for like 40 years, each year, which is pretty incredible. And when I was 7, I had my first mass, served my first mass.
Okay, as an altar boy.
Correct.
Yes.
And Monsignor Reardon was retired at the time, and a really old guy, and couldn't understand a word he was saying during mass. But I went out into the parking lot right after we were done, and at the back of the church, and it was in the parking lot, and I hear this voice booming. It's like coming out of the clouds with clarity and force. And it says, "Peter." And I turn around, and there's Monsignor Reardon. He's like motioning me over. It's on the steps of the church. And I walk like with fear and trepidation to this man. He was this piercing Irish blue eyes, right? These old gnarled hands. And he takes my hand, my right hand, he puts his 2 hands between mine, and this penetrating stare, right, into me. And he says, "Peter, you are going to be a priest."
Wow, you're 7.
Now you could see, how he was able to pull this off for 40 years. Yeah, 7 years old. And my aunts and my mother then conspired to make sure there was going to be a priest in the family. And a lot of us Catholic families grew up like in these traditional families, especially there were 6 boys in my family. One of you was going to be a priest. And they made vestments for me, the whole works. I knew the entire canon of the Mass, by the time I was 7 and so forth. So this initiation into this extraordinarily complex and huge system, right, began then. And that path of the priesthood was traditionally really set out for someone, that you were going to be an altar boy. The thing was altar boy, seminarian, and I went to the seminary. It was a boarding school. It still exists, believe it or not, a high school seminary. There was like 300 of us in Mount Calvary, Wisconsin.
And when do you start? What age
named.
Do you start that seminary?
I was 13.
Okay.
So I was recruited out of that when I was 13.
So it's basically high school. You start high school, you go to...
Yeah, but you're there to be a priest.
Sure, yeah.
So this was run by the Capuchin Franciscans. There were 50 monks living in the... this thing was founded like 1843, like by these 2 Capuchin Swiss priests. They were like trudging through the middle of Wisconsin, which was like the frontier at the time.
Sure.
People don't realize everything was frontier at the time. And they see this hill above them, and they're going to like build this seminary and make these priests, right? So the whole idea, of this, of you've got like 50 priests that are going to raise children to become priests is really interesting.
You really see the machine when you hear that.
And that's exactly right. This has been, and a lot of the sexual violence and sexual abuse and assault comes out of this kind of system. And I think, and if you look historically, this problem in the church has been raised in their own documents going back to the 3rd century. So this is a problem that has disappeared and reemerged and disappeared and reemerged in this minor seminary system. Well, like the priest that raped and assaulted me at the seminary. I was 13 when it happened. He himself had gone to that school, for high school, never left there, was raised by these guys, then went to college in Marathon, in another hill out in Wausau, where they had their own separate college, went to their divinity school, basically, again, in these isolated places, and then went right back to teach at this school at St. Lawrence, and spent his entire life there. I probably have talked to and have been in contact with at least 50 to 55 victims of Father Liefeld over the years, the guy that assaulted me. And, the real question here is always about, well, what is this about? Like, what is going on here with this worldwide global phenomena of priests that are raping and sexually assaulting children? Now, of course, most priests don't abuse children. obviously.
Right.
But the question is, why such a high percentage? And I think you can argue statistically it's higher than other occupations. They say it's not, but it is. And is this something that, as they like to portray it, is coming from the secular world? That's exactly how they like to say it, especially Archbishop Listecki and Dolan. That the secular world, they allowed the secular world to invade their utopian Catholic world, and they infected it. And they love to talk about the blame on homosexuality in particular, and that this is all about homosexuality, which is absolutely ludicrous, of course, and that's what happened, and that they have to expel all of the secular influences, basically, that they allowed in, and that's the problem. So to them, it's the symptom here is something on the outside, and it's an external enemy. But the real question is, and the question they don't want to think about, is what if this is coming from the inside?
Right.
You know, they used to always say, this is an external problem. They would say that. We can deal with this. We don't report to the police. We don't do that because this is our own problem. This is our problem. And they're right, in a way. They're absolutely right. They created this problem. And so it's like this manufacturing of this kind of perverse character. A lot of it's based upon ordination and the idea of ordination and what the priest is. And, you know, people don't realize that you can be under their rules now. Now, remember, they have their own law. They have their own system of law.
Canon law, yes.
Canon law. And it's not like, you know, to the rest of us, it might be, well, that's like an extremely complicated, interesting, Baroque or even medieval, fascinating. I mean, because people like to think of the Catholic Church, don't much about it, like guys with candles going in back rooms and stuff like that. I mean,
incense,
right? Exactly,
like that.
And that's a lot of their power is derived from this idea that something secretive is going on in there. Okay, the Da Vinci Code sort of thing,
right?
And really, nothing very secretive is going on. Everything I'm talking about is in the open. There are no big secrets about sexual abuse. This has been out in the open for a long time. But the idea is that, again, let me put it this way to make it as simple as possible. When I first met Cardinal Dolan and Archbishop Listecki and these other cardinals, and if I ever get a chance to talk to the Pope, I always ask one question of these guys, because to me it gets to the heart of what I'm trying to get at here. And it's this. Okay, you can't be a woman and a priest, and I'll accept that for the moment. And you can't be a married man and a priest, and I'll accept that for the moment. But you can be a child molester and a priest.
Yeah.
How does that add up?
Well, and that's my is explain that to me. It's like when I was at Harvard, Nelson Goodman, the philosopher, was there, and he would have this thing about how he'd take a sentence, he'd go, construct a world in which this sentence is true. So that, you know, and no one, they can't answer it.
Not well, anyways.
Well, no, I mean, not answer it at all. So it's like, because I'll be at the front, I tell them, I will be in the front pew in the cathedral every day for Mass. I'll go to every benediction. I'll confess constantly. Twice a day, I'll go to confession to you, if you can answer this question. What it gets to, again, is this sort of perverse nature of the priesthood and how it's constructed in its own law. Its own law allows a priest, if he has raped or sexually assaulted a child, to remain a priest.
Yes.
Okay? So it's like, okay, you have an occupation in which you can sexually assault and abuse children and remain working in that occupation with children. Okay? Now, in the United States, they've removed some of these guys, and it's a complicated story. There has been some revision for the United States, but that's only been for the United States, incidentally. So,
right.
so around the world, this is the status quo for the priesthood. And again, it lives in their law and rules. See what I'm saying? It's not just some, change your culture, change how they're thinking about things, modernize how, whatever. It lives within those rules. If you change that rule, all these other things are going to be implicated in it. This rule that I'm talking about. And that's why you'd give me one thing like the Death Star in Star Wars. Give me the one shot. Right. Okay. That would be what it would be. I would change like one sentence in canon law, because it's kind of like a Jenga situation, in my opinion, where you pull that out and then all the other things are going to start tumbling down around it. That's my
I was surprised to find while researching this that you're absolutely correct. You don't see that. What you did see, and this came to the point in Milwaukee with I think Father Lawrence Murphy, was that he was actually perpetrating some of the abuse in the confessional box itself. So there is a law that you're not allowed to do that in a sacramental process like that. So they were able to kind of use that loophole, but it seems like, wow. I mean, to be abused is horrible. In the confessional, it just made me recoil to think that even happened at all.
I'll tell you what's more amazing than that. Okay. Now that Murphy case, of course, is, probably to me, it's like the case that sums up everything we're talking about this issue, is the assault and rape of those deaf guys, who are, so many of them are part of our group, they're part of this community. They still have not been receiving justice.
Right,
they
200, I think, right?
Yeah, there were 200. And it was like, they were the first survivors, incidentally as well, to come forward publicly in the world about this. Mm-hmm. They were out there flyering in the 1970s about Murphy and the Archdiocese at the cathedral. Archbishop Cousin's 25th anniversary as a bishop. They're out there flying. They're flying at the district attorney's office. And the district attorney was utterly and completely involved in covering this up, and had been for that year and 25 years into the future. And that's in the documents. That's like, I'm not like giving some speculation here. And what's amazing about that confessional thing about the Murphy case, Murphy was brought in for a review or an examination, a 3-day assessment by, of course, their own people. Okay.
Right. Yeah, it's always internal.
Oh, of course. And the thing is, psychologists that work for them, and so many, the big thing about this story generally is how all the other occupations and professions in society that were supposed to put this institution in check, including the law, for instance, and including what's still happening, what happened at the bankruptcy court,
it's true.
How it still has allowed them to skate free in some essential way and not be held accountable and not be transparent. And they're still got hundreds of documents that they have not released about priests that have not been named, that have been alleged, and some of them quite credibly, of abusing children. And we're sitting here still having this conversation in 2016. And I came forward in 1992. I'm having this damn conversation it's unbelievable, right? And it's like the thing about Murphy and the confession, get back to that, is that when you look at that assessment they made, they ask him, well, where did you do this? And he's like, in confession. All right. Cause it's all, and he goes, and they ask him, well, where did you have confession? Where did you do confession? And he goes, well, in the confessional, in the parking lot, in the dorm, at the, right. So everywhere, what he did is like every assault, every rape that he had was a confessional thing under the sacrament of confession. Right. You say, this is now confession. Okay. And they're like, okay. And what's really so amazing about this is, okay, when you're a kid, when I was growing up, confession was like, oh my God. It was like to break confession.
Yeah.
Or what? Oh my God. And like, the Hitchcock movie, whatever, with, in the 50s with the priest who can't reveal who the murderer is because he was told it in confession.
Right,
okay?
right.
And this whole thing. So, but what's interesting about this Murphy case and so telling is that, so they let the Congregation of the Faith, which is the congregation that Ratzinger at the time was in charge of, who became Pope Benedict. Okay, there used to be the Inquisition. That's their, okay, that used to be the Office of the Inquisition. It's all going to them, right? And so they send him all this stuff. He's got all the stuff. He's raped at least 200 deaf kids. He's in Superior, Wisconsin. He's working in a parish up there. He's doing whatever the hell he wants. He doesn't follow any church discipline at all. He's not following his bishop's discipline whatsoever. He's doing whatever the hell he wants. And he's done all this in confession, which brings it up in their rules to like, this is like code red or something. This is like super, okay. And it doesn't matter. They could care less. There is like no indication in these documents and how they talk about this that, where the ordinary person would be like, even if you're not Catholic, like freaking out about the confession thing.
Absolutely.
They could absolutely care less. And what they did is then use it that it was confession to take it to another level of secrecy. And then they had their own secret trial about Murphy here in Milwaukee, which no one could talk about. And even it's so ironic, right? These deaf kids, all right, and these now adults that can't talk about this. In order for them to testify or their evidence to be used by this court, which the diocese weekly at the time is saying, this will give us the power to do something about Murphy, they had to swear to secrecy, that they would not talk to anybody about what they were saying.
Wow.
They would not talk to anybody about this trial. And this trial was, guess what? As they do canon law trials. Guess what the judge is? Oh, yeah, he's a priest. Guess who the defense attorney is? Oh, yeah, he's a priest.
Yep.
Guess who the prosecutor is? He's a priest. I mean, they have the whole work, statute of limitations, everything. And it's all this clerical court, right? It's like a separate justice system. And they're all bound to secrecy. And they're told that they have to like take this oath of secrecy about it. And if they break it, they are automatically excommunicated.
Right. Or lacetized, right?
Right. Well, no, I'm saying that in the secret court that they did.
Excommunicated. Okay, that's even bigger.
Yeah, well, absolutely. So, I mean, and all these guys wanted, too, and this now we're talking about in the 90s, all they wanted was that when Murphy died, do not bury him in his vestments, his priestly vestments. Don't have this 21-gun salute funeral that they always have. And what do you think they did when he died?
Exactly.
And it was an open casket. They begged. That's all they wanted.
Right.
Please don't. And their acknowledgement, later on, that we acknowledge this, what had happened. We admitted to what happened, was that in the homily that the auxiliary bishop did for Murphy, his homily is hilarious. It starts off with what a fantastic, God-loving man this guy was. And then about two paragraphs in, when you read this thing, he says, but a shadow was cast over Father Murphy's ministry. That's the line. One line. That's like, that was like saying, apparently that was saying, and by the way, he raped and sexually assaulted at least 200 deaf children in this boarding school. Okay. And then never spent a day in prison. We put him up and lived, he died with a $750,000 estate. He continued to work in parishes. We didn't warn a person. And he got to die with the, vestments on, the full gun salute. And on his gravestone is Reverend Lawrence Murphy, right on his gravestone.
This is like giving
only a matter of time till he's canonized, it sounds like. He's fast track to sainthood,
It's got to be a pope.
Right.
Sure.
It
to be
sounds like
canonized,
giving...
it's an automatic pope, sainthood now if you're a pope.
We might as well give Benedict Arnold a state funeral. I mean, it seems like, well, he was great, but he sold us out, but we'll do it anyways. And I think in 1993, this is 20 years after the initial crimes were committed, it finally does make its way up through canon law to the Vatican, who finally agree to deal with it, but then postpone his defrocking, or that, by, I don't know if it was excommunication necessarily, but they were going to take his priesthood away. They're going to take the holy orders away. And then they said he's in ill health, so they postpone it, and he ends up dying with the honors that you said. And I found that incredible.
If you look at the documentation, and it's amazing how we obtained that documentation. It's literally a miracle, and I mean that in every sense of the word, that we got these internal documents from the Vatican, because you never, ever see them. Okay. And it's a mountain of documentation. I mean, it's like 5 feet or 6 feet of documentation. And there's one letter, it's a page and a half, that Murphy's canon lawyer writes to Ratzinger and to the office saying, these things happened in the past, and I'm ill, and I'm not doing too well. Don't take the priesthood from me. There's no reason to do that. And they're like, okay.
I'll be dead soon. Yeah.
And he dies. Of course, you know how he dies, right? He dies because he has a heart attack at the casino.
Oh, I did not know that.
In the Green Bay, whatever, the Oneida. That's his... You thought Marlon Brando had a happy death in The Godfather.
Right.
With playing with his grandchild or whatever. He's out in the... Yeah, he dies at the tables. Has a heart attack. He's brought to the hospital, and that's the end of him. Never one. I mean, when I was in Rome with this case, right, we were detained with the Rome police. It was a huge international story because we came with these documents. We're in front of St. Peter's with these documents.
Is this in the 90s then?
No, this is in 2010.
Okay.
This is where the whole case came out. The whole thing blew up, and it's like, Ratzinger was just beginning to be identified with a case in Germany that he had covered up for with a priest there.
Yeah.
So I knew, we knew that this stuff now is going to be really explosive. It's really going to be heard because no one had seen that. There's a case of deaf children and like that, right? But so we were detained by the Rome police, and this was like an international story. And I was feeling like it's not going to be too big of a problem here because the whole international press corps is outside waiting for us.
Yeah.
Right? And you have when this kind of thing happens, you have like one sentence if you're lucky, because the whole world press is there and it's like the lead story, and it's like you get one sentence. So I'm leaving the police station, saying goodbye to the police officer. That was something else too, being with those guys. But it's like half of them are probably victims themselves, right? So we go outside. There's a press corps and the question, and then it was like, here's my one question, and it came to me when I was walking down the steps, and what I said was, we've now spent more time in a police station than Father Murphy did his entire life.
Wow,
okay?
Yeah.
There's a juxtaposition. It's not Shakespeare, but it's a good line. And it's like, yeah, exactly. What else do you need to say? And to think, I'm telling you, that these deaf victims have had to drag themselves into this bankruptcy. Some of them have received next to nothing, no compensation, no help whatsoever. When they're heroes. They're the ones that brought this forward first. They filed the first civil case ever about this. And the only way you get documents is through civil cases. Believe me, that's the only way you get this. That case, that victim, that deaf victim, to get $3,000 for counseling, he had to sign a release dropping his case and apologizing. He had to apologize to the archdiocese and to the archbishop for all the trouble he caused.
Ouch.
Okay.
Oh, poor guy. The picture you paint is outrageous, and of course you started out by saying that we have to acknowledge that most priests don't molest children, but the story you're telling, it's hard to believe that there is any priest anywhere that doesn't know. Is there an innocent priest or nun in the system?
Well, I mean, we work with now. We have an alliance where we work with clergy.
Right.
They're like more terrified than we are of coming forward. It's not, the system's unbelievable. There's several priests here. Father Jim Connell, who was the chancellor of the archdiocese,
right, who's
a canon lawyer, and it's a really amazing sort of story about how we became friends and joined together. I think when you ask that question, it's like kind of like any of these guys that have really stepped forward and condemned this action and behavior are ecclesiastically dead. They are going to be, it's like trying to be, you're going to be in the 1930s in a southern town, and you're going to go to the police about the Klan.
Right.
When, like, most of the members of the police are part of the Klan.
Yeah, and even a couple senators, U.S. sitting senators.
You're finished. Yeah. I mean, your business is finished, whatever. And it's that. So whenever that's why whenever clergy talk about this, it's from instructions from down at Chancery Office, how to talk about this. It's in the string of pastoral cliches. They're just not able to deal with this. But I will say that there are, I think most clergy don't want this to happen. Know some classmate that was doing this kind of behavior, committed themselves to this kind of behavior, realize that there's something wrong with this system, are completely dependent on it, and just, again, I don't know how to say this except other than I don't think most people are heroes. I don't think most of us are here. I'm not making an excuse for anybody. If there was a flood happening right now in the river, down the Milwaukee River, people would be tearing down there.
Right.
And we would see the best of human behavior. But when it comes to this, how everyday life functions, and what's me and what's mine and my place in life, there are so many reasons not to do something.
Yes.
Okay. There are 1,000 million excuses not to do something.
It's striking as during my research, and Peter, I used some of your blog and some of your writings, but I got this, and from the man you mentioned, Jim Connell, as the vice chair of the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, says this. In high school in the 1950s, we learned about statutory rape. We knew for an adult to have sexual activities with a minor was against the law, and that didn't change over time. And now contrast that with what Weakland says, who's the Archbishop between 1977 and 2002, I think. In the early years of the sexual abuse scandal, I didn't understand that child abuse was a crime. I mean, these are in stark opposition. I mean, again, I paraphrase, but it indicates that Weakland is wondering whether this can only be explained, I think, is from the institutionalized change in the way you can start thinking differently.
We've had, what's so instructive about Milwaukee is that we've had probably the most progressive and liberal archbishop in the United States, which was Weakland.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Renaissance man.
Yes.
10 languages, Juilliard graduate, as he always let us know.
Right. Even spoke out for homosexuality, saying that these folks shouldn't have to live a non-physical love life.
You're right, or as he put it, which goes a lot to the system we're talking about. I think the phrase he used in the Times when this came out was something like genital expression.
Yes.
Which sounds like a punk rock band from the 70s.
Yeah.
But it gives you that metallic, even with that, the sort of metallic quality of what sexuality is. How do you describe love or even like sex as genital expression?
He did say that. I left that out when
perverse.
I wrote down the quote because I found it to be odd. That's right.
It's perverse is what it is. Not perverse in the sense of, not normal, but perverse in an almost clinical sense.
Yeah.
And it's just like this perverse way of like, it's instrumental. It's this instrumentality. And the thing about the priest is that the priest is the instrument of God. And that is ipso facto perverse. And any perverse orientation is I am but the humble instrument of some big other. So if it's like Stalinist Russia, and there's so many comparisons I think between the old Soviet Union and the Catholic Church. That's why they were such mirrored arch enemies. All right, but this thing about how I've lost my train of thought with the microphone there.
But I think
this thing about this instrumentality.
Yeah.
So in like Stalinist Russia, you were the humble instrument of historical necessity. That's what I am. If it's Eichmann and you're getting the train schedule for Auschwitz, prepare. It's like I am the humble instrument of race.
yes. All
And
for
it's
the
like,
motherland.
well, and he was like, how hard it was, and he meant it was like he's in Jerusalem, he's on trial, and he's like, he's quoting Immanuel Kant, he's quoting the categorical imperative, and he's like, basically, he's like, it's always passive third person, what I had to endure, what I had to suffer, myself, to have to be the instrument of having this happen.
To be encumbered with these orders.
Right, exactly. This was not easy for me. He's like, he knew some Hebrew. He considered himself close to some of the Zionist leaders in Germany. It's like, it's not personal.
Wow.
None of this is personal. That's the point. You know what I mean? None of this is personal. So what I'm saying with Weakland and this description of sexuality as some sort of like I don't know what, it's some sort of instrumentality for self-expression or some sort of whatever the hell is, but genital expression, just shows you how whether you are a liberal in that system or whether you are a arch conservative like Listecki is and Dolan was to some extent, doesn't make any difference. That system made Archbishop Weakland as well. He was able to retire. He's retired now. He's got full pension. He's got whatever he gets a year. He's fully taken care of. He's fine. And not only that, he also erected to himself, that's in the cathedral now, a large side altar, has a bronze frieze of Jesus with the little children.
Yes,
right?
blessing the children.
And St. John the Evangelist is on one side of the children, with his halo. And then who's on the other side? Etched in bronze for all time is Archbishop Weakland, the protector of children. When thousands of children were raped and assaulted under his watch, and he's the protector of children. So it's like in this bronze frieze. Now, if you go to the cathedral, well, my mother, who died at St. Patrick's Day a few years ago, she was a very, very, very Catholic, and she was a fanatically devoted to the Blessed Virgin Mary, okay? She would go into that cathedral. And this is what I tried to explain to Dolan and Listecki as to why they have to take this thing out of the cathedral. Okay. She, like many mothers like her, would go immediately to that side altar. And they would get down on their knees. And they would be in such anguish about what happened to their child. Okay. And the guilt that they would feel about their child being raped and assaulted. Okay. By a priest, and she would look up, I can imagine, in anguish and tears, and see in bronze right in front of her the man who assigned that rapist to her parish who raped her child. So hello, what do we need to say as victims in this community? I mean,
right, and incidentally, the same man that took some of the church collection monies to pay $450,000 to pay off his homosexual lover to not come out and expose him. I mean, so he's using church money to bribe an ex-lover as well as.
And by the way, that's the only thing that actually finally sort of brought him down was that all the cover up that he did. No, it didn't matter. That's the only thing that mattered. And I guess the thing is too, that story was known. That story was not broken by the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel that had that story. That had to come from somewhere else. And I can go over and over and over again that the major stories that have been revealed about Milwaukee have had to come through the Washington Post or ABC or the New York Times or somewhere else usually. Because and there was a time here, a period of time in the early 90s where this newspaper was far in advance of the Boston Globe and had by far the best investigative reporter on these stories. And these stories were breaking, they were happening. And that was shut down. And that's happened again. Have you read anything about the bankruptcy or anything that's going on? No, you haven't. It's done. It's a dead story. They have not wanted to cover this story. Now, that's not everybody down there. Don't get me wrong. There are some fantastic reporters there. But the church has blockers, like any incredibly powerful corporation, everywhere. They got them in every newsroom. They got them in every boardroom. They got them, believe me, they have them in Madison. Right. And they've got them in Washington. And it's simply naive nonsense to think that they're not there, and the attack that survivors have had to endure from these three archbishops, including in what's happened in bankruptcy, is a real testimony to the courage of so many victims in this community that have come forward and pressed for change, because we don't want a child to go through the kind of thing that we went through, and that's what it's about. Period. End of story. And they make it about everything else. They try to make it about money, this, that, and other thing. It's not. It's simply about, I can't sit here knowing, as I do, that there are clergy out there who have not been investigated, who have credible reports of sexual abuse.
It was one of the things I took away from the movie yesterday, and the team members went and previewed. Help me. Spotlight yesterday, and one of the things I took away was that just what you were saying. The people there are people who knew and actively denied, but the blockers you speak of aren't necessarily doing that consciously. All of them, they're just people who feel really bad, and they don't want to upset the apple cart. They want to believe that the church is overall better than worse. They want to protect it just because it's
and you get leaned on.
Yes, and it's just such an important part of their own comfort. In their lives, these mothers who were looking to the church, and it was more than once in the movie. This was like God coming to your house when the priest came over and paid you some attention. You didn't dream of denying his request or not following his recommendations or orders. It was just unheard of. So that honestly, the machine that's involved in keeping this thing under wraps is phenomenal.
And that's at the local level too. I mean, let's take it up even higher as you get to the Pope. And I think if I get the name wrong, correct me. It's like Muriel Marcel. I think he was in Mexico.
Marcel, yeah.
Yes. An extremely active pedophile priest that I was a friend directly of Pope John Paul II, and I think pardoned by him directly. Again, as you speak to this institutional law, like, what do you think of his process in this, and then the Pope's going from Pope John Paul up?
To me, I look at this, and it's a miracle that any of this has come out, given the unbelievable forces against having any of this truth surface. And when I talk about miracle, I mean that. I mean, it's a miracle. To me, the resurrection is when you're listening to testimony in Madison for the Child Victims Act, which the church and the Archdiocese has spent a lot of money to defeat, right? And you've got victim after victim coming forward and testifying. And when they get and they testify and they witness, and you hear the voice of truth coming through them, when they're in that place of dispossession and they're talking, it's not a powerful moment, I can guarantee you. You don't feel like a Lifetime movie, I can guarantee you. But out of that crime and the emptiness and horror that created comes this voice that is like a resurrection. And it is the raising of that voice, right?
No, I see what you're saying.
And it's that voice that has the potential to create this effect. And it's disruptive. And it's meant to be disruptive. I mean, the rule of, the great 1939 movie Rule of the Game, which is a fantastic movie, Renoir, right? And it's a very uncomfortable film, but it maybe is the greatest film ever made because it's about spectating and watching films. But the thing there is like, what is the rule of the game? Okay? And the rule of the game, the cardinal rule, because all these people in this movie, it's kind of like this farce, but it's not. And it's like, they're all breaking the rules, right? But what's the rule they never break? The cardinal rule everyone conforms to, okay? Which is you do not interrupt the ordinary functioning of daily life. That you do not do. And in our society, of course, what is the thing you cannot disrupt? The flow of capital. If there's a mortal sin, okay, it's interrupting the flow of capital. And nothing happened with this until victims trying everything, going back to everyone went back to the church first, usually. Everyone went back, they said they were going to do something, whatever, until the lawsuits were filed, until money got involved, because they weren't going to throw these people in prison, obviously. So until money got involved, nothing got revealed, nothing got changed. But doing that,
the lawsuits and I think you were encouraging people to make the lawsuits simply because you must have to raise this voice. I think this is what you're taking. You're taking it from a small volume level and turning it up.
First of all, it's the only way to get those secret documents. They have to be court ordered. They have never voluntarily released one vowel of their elaborate document, because they hang themselves. Okay, the documents hang them. Okay. So they've never released one, and they fight. They spend millions and millions and millions of dollars to fight not doing this. So the only way you got to get them into court and do it. It also brings about any kind of criminal prosecution has usually almost always come through filing those civil cases. Yes. And the other thing is that's the tool to try to bring about or force some kind of reform within this system. How else? What are you supposed to do? How else are you supposed to do it? And what they've done so well, and I think this is where we are now, and I think it's not just our organization, I think it's activism in general, is around, it's always get out the information, get out the truth. And somehow, if you can do that, things are going to change. Yeah. Well, now, the system seems pretty accommodated to that. It's like, well, there's another scandal, there's some, whatever. Yeah, it's really bad. And then we go on to the next thing.
Right, that's turn the page.
Right, that's what happened with this bankruptcy. Yeah. It's like you can outweight. If you've got the money and the power, you just outweight the disclosures, and you'll just keep rigging the system to do what you have to get it done.
Right. And I was speaking of the bankruptcy and what you mentioned too about how they haven't released any of the documents voluntarily. It makes all of the apologies that have been said kind of ring hollow a little bit, but also if we're looking at specifically the Milwaukee bankruptcy, and for the people that aren't familiar, in 2007, $57 million was put into a trust, and the cardinal or the archbishop at the time, Dolan, had contacted the Vatican and said that we need to do this to protect against liability. Now, ostensibly, it's actually to promote cemetery health, or they're using this for money, but it really was to protect it. Ultimately, right now in the bankruptcy trials, if I'm right, they've been now merged. So all of the criminal cases against these priests have been merged into a bankruptcy case. And some of these people are going to get paid off, some aren't, but no one's going to stand trial criminally, it looks like. I mean, look at the
results of this 5 years of bankruptcy. Okay. And it's happened here like no other bankruptcies in the United States. And it's complicated because one of the things that complicated is that victims here could only file for fraud, which is a whole nother cause of action.
Because the Supreme Court ruled that.
Right, because there was a ruling by our Supreme Court, the only one in the country. We got several of these things like we're the only one in the country in which you could not file a lawsuit against a pedophile priest or his supervising bishop because it would interfere with the practice of religion.
That's right.
It would interfere with the First Amendment. Yes, hello. I mean, it's like that's the law in our state. So you can rape a child, and in the justice in the majority opinion, as they talk about it, it's like even if that bishop forgives that priest, puts him in another location, and he does it again, it doesn't matter because no court could decide what forgiveness means. No one could get into that kind of thing.
And even the fraud, it wasn't changed till 2007.
That's right. And there's a statute of limitations on it.
Yes.
So they immediately targeted, of course, my case, like I knew they would, and they brought over 1,000 pages of things I've written, interviews I've done, stories I've done, and they said, if anybody knew before the 7-year statute or 5-year statute on fraud that we were covering up sex crimes, it's him.
Right. And
so they're in there going, we're guilty, therefore we shouldn't have to compensate him.
Right.
Because he was saying we were guilty, and what they love to say, and what the court has, is that the person should have started his fraud investigation.
Right.
So I'm like, well, that's great. Every time now you get baptized in the Catholic Church, you should also get, along with your baptismal certificate, a fraud investigation kit. Maybe you'll have like a magnifying glass. Maybe you'll have a decoder ring, and you're going to figure out, once you've been raped by a priest, that you need to start your investigation.
Yes, they could just add it to catechism or CCD, whatever
exactly.
kids go to.
Precisely.
You could print it on a towel. Another great example, Peter, I thought was of Monica Barrett. Speaking of what they said to your case, and in her case, she was raped at 8 years old in 1968. But her claim was, like yours, determined to be invalid. And in their case, they said, but she was Father Effinger. This was his first victim, so the church couldn't possibly be liable because we wouldn't have known at that point there was no pattern. I mean, how dismissive of a rape of an 8-year-old.
There's always a way to blame the victim.
Everyone is always the first one when they went down.
Yeah.
Well, you're the first one. You're the first one that we've ever heard this about. And of course, that's a lie. And when they set up a mediation program, Dolan set up a mediation program, he lied to victims about their knowledge. And they could do that because mediation can't be brought back to court. There's not only like this First Amendment thing they got going about the church, there's also this thing about when you agree to go into mediation with a corporation, nothing that gets said and done in mediation can be used in any kind of court action in the future. Did you know that? Because I can tell you no victim knew that, but I tell you who did know it, the lawyers of the archdiocese. They're the ones who set it up this way. So they're in there, again, lying to these deaf guys, for instance, telling them, we didn't know about Father Murphy until 1978 or 79, something like that. And what do we find in the documents now? They knew about him since at least 1958. So what they did that so they couldn't file fraud cases. That's exactly why they did that. Let the statute run out. Okay. Thus saith the Lord. I mean, this is the kind of appalling, institutionally disgusting, and perfectly apparently acceptable because it's part of how the ordinary things run.
Right.
It's part of how things run.
It's always been.
Right. It's always been. This is how things go. This is how corporations act. They're trying. They didn't mean it. Et cetera. On and on and on and on and on. And it all falls in the back of, guess what? Victims. They're the ones. You're going to have to do something. You're going to have to stop it. You're going to have to change the church. You're going to have to do something. Really? Yeah. It's going to have to do it because nobody else is going to.
So this is the reason why about 300 of I think in Milwaukee, 575 victims aren't going to get any compensation at all.
Well, they're going to get some. Let's let me tell you who.
Yeah, could you clear this up?
I will. 5 years of bankruptcy. At the end of the day, $32 million is going to lawyers.
Wow.
It was their settlement. $32 million is going to lawyers. $14 million are going to all the victims.
Wow.
Some are going to get nothing. Some are going to get $5,000. And the highest amount is going to be probably like around $40,000. Okay?
Wow.
And they came into bankruptcy because when they were caught at this in the 90s, when we were bringing this up and it started getting reporting on, what they did instead of change their system is that they changed their structure legally. That's what they did. So none of their parishes, they went into bankruptcy saying, the Archbishop runs none of the parishes. He's not in charge of any of the parishes or anything. And Judge Kelly, okay, no one's ruled like that in other bankruptcies. So that's gone. But they also come in and they have $300 million in their main corporation. So what do? They have an investment fund, quote unquote, of $70 million that Dolan makes disappear in 2005. And she says, that's fishy, but it's too complicated. It's too complicated to figure out. Okay, so that's gone. They've got a Faith in Our Future fund that they set up outside the Archdiocese, telling people, you can give money to this because the Archdiocese isn't going to run it. It's got one trustee, Archbishop Listecki, $120 million. None of it's been touched. None of it. Then we have the coup de grace, which is the cemetery trust that
Yes.
Archbishop Dolan sets up He's got to get permission from Rome to do this, which, by the way, under their law, he has to. Now, if I got to get permission from you to do something, aren't you my boss? Mm-hmm. You bet you are. So this judge, she doesn't want to open this up because it should have included the guys in the Vatican who set up this thing, and Benedict had to approve it. He had exactly. Mm-hmm. So why isn't their money and estate opened up for victims here? If they're the ones deciding the economic structure of the archdiocese, if the final decision is theirs, then aren't they also to be brought into this? Aren't they responsible for this fraudulent practice? So he gets his permission, sets it up, and this is the thing. Fraud. Fraud is very, very rarely prosecuted. I think what I've seen is like 2%. Just in general, right? And it's often prosecuted with criminal cases, 75% of it. So it's very under-prosecuted, but it is, believe it or not, a crime. It is against the law. Mm-hmm. Even for Lehman Brothers, apparently. It was apparently.
Apparently.
Okay, right, apparently. So it's like, what you never get, though, with fraud, and all the circumstantial evidence should be enough for fraud. I mean, when he sets this trust up, the timing with it, it's so obvious. Dolan is like, I'm in charge of one corporation. I'm going to set up a trust with me in charge of it. And then I'm going to move money from this one to that one. Okay. Suspicious sounding. And then I'm going to say, I'm going to have this other corporation that I've got go bankrupt. Yeah. And I say, I don't got the money. So there's all that. But he actually wrote a letter, right? Yes, it's like, where's the smoking gun? Well, here's the smoking gun. He wrote a letter where he actually says to the Vatican why he's setting this up.
He's worried about liability.
Exactly. So basically, U.S. courts cannot compensate victims of clergy sexual abuse. Yes. Wow. Okay. Now, you know what that is? That's fraud. You cannot do that. You cannot take this money, move it so that you will not have to pay judgments that are going to come against you.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Especially for raping children. How about that?
Right.
So not only does he do that, you have the smoking gun, right? Now with the bankruptcy settlement, that's it. It's not going to be investigated. I met with the trustee. A group of us met with the U.S. trustee, because that's from the Department of Justice. The trustee's office is supposed to oversee the bankruptcy process to make sure that nothing fishy takes place. No criminal activity, no fraudulent activity. And they are not going to do anything. They can't tell me whether they made a referral to the U.S. Attorney for fraud. But he said to me something really interesting, because nobody wanted this thing to be investigated for it's criminal. Dolan should be in prison for this.
Right.
Okay. He said there's a difference between morality and the law. And he backpedaled fast when I repeated this back to him, because I said that's exactly right. There is a chasm, apparently, an unbridgeable chasm between morality and the law. I mean, there is such a shamelessness about this whole thing. It is just utterly, where is the shame of a legal system that, as I just told you, allows lawyers to walk away with $32 million while some victims get nothing? That's twice as much for lawyers and victims. And then the archdiocese are going to say, this is all about healing. This is all about, making things better. Right. This is all about turning the corner.
It's an incredible web of corruption that you're describing here. You've blown away all of our questions, taken up nearly the entire hour with your in-depth knowledge of the larger issue here. It seems almost like the exposure of the original scandal has simply started a domino effect of other cover-ups going into motion.
Thank you.
Before we continue, I do have to get in a couple of words, self-promotion here. You're listening to the Mythicist Milwaukee Show, and he is Peter Isely of the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, which I guess was his main push in life after the breakup of the Isley brothers, which you also founded in the 60s.
You can find that. You can find it snapwisconsin.com and also snapnetwork.org.
Snapnetwork.org. And if we're going to do nothing else here today, we want to make sure that we highlight that great organization for victims who have not yet come forth or those who have but still need support. Please go to snapnetwork.org and help out in any way that you can, or get help if you need it still. It's the Mythicist Milwaukee Show. We want to remind everybody to support us on Patreon. Pledge as little or as much as you can per show or per time period. Also, consider joining with a membership at mythicistmilwaukee.com. We'll link you to all the pertinent places. You can help out with a couple of options for a membership, which will help us continue to bring you great guests like today's important personality in the sex abuse scandal in the Catholic Church. And we want to remind everybody before we get back to the topic here of the Buzzed Belief series coming of debates starting in March between Richard Carrier and Justin Bass, and continuing on in October for the much-awaited debate on the historicity of Jesus between Dr. Robert Price and Bart Ehrman. Let's get back to our guest, Peter Isely. Tell us what you can about the beginnings of SNAP. We saw in the movie, Phil Saviano started, much like we did probably, with a community organization and 7 or 8 people. You were right there at the beginning, or how did that work?
Yeah, I mean, Phil's a terrific guy. I couldn't think of a better human being to represent us that are not so good as he is. He's just a terrific guy. And, you know, when you're in so many battles with somebody, like I have been with Phil over the years, the solidarity and friendship and loyalty. I mean, I was thinking about this a couple days ago, that like when I was a boy at the seminary, and how the faculty would often be so concerned about friendships. Now, part of it was this sort of homoerotic terror, fear, whatever is going on with them. But the other thing was about how loyalty and love is such a threat to this system that if you're allowing your fellow clergy to rape and assault children, okay, if your system allows that, fraud's an easy thing. You know, right. I mean, hiding money in the cemetery, that's easy. You know what I mean? After all, it's much worse what you've done, and it's like you have to betray something that's so deep and decent about being a human being. Mm-hmm. And I think this is what all kinds of systems do. I would argue that's what capitalism does. And it's like, when I think about Phil, because I want to, make this shout out to him and so many of the survivors I've known over the years who stood shoulder to shoulder, that love that you form with somebody who has gone through this with you, and that you stand up together, and, there's no reason to do it. All right. I mean, it's the dumbest thing to do. I mean, many of us did this with SNAP, and I mean, we sort of found each other because we were around the United States. We were all on our own doing this, right? And I just can remember, that, the ethical power of that action. And I'm trying to convince myself here, okay, as to why this has been worth it. But I mean, the ethical act, like when Phil did what he did, just the purity of his ethical courage, right? And no one's going to believe you. And the thing is, like, our thing back in the day was like, well, no one's going to believe this happened to you. And then to find out that the problem wasn't that no one believed, especially in the system. And I'm talking about Bishop, the provincial, the district attorney, etc., is that they already knew it.
Right, but you just can't do anything about it.
Well, I mean, we thought, when I went back, I was in my 20s, right? And I thought, oh my God, it's like, I took so long to get this back to them. I thought they were going to be angry with me for not being able to come forward sooner to them. And I thought immediately they're going to find out about this. I mean, if I told you, okay, you're the bishop or you're the provincial, and I told you one of your guys has been using the collar and using his title and using his fellow brothers or whatever in the order to assault and rape children, you would just like go crazy. You would like, if I found out about Murphy, wouldn't you, if you're Ratzinger, wouldn't you have got on a plane yourself, on a damn plane, came to Wisconsin, took a car up there and just ripped the collar right off his neck?
It ought to fly up the priority.
Right. But it's like, where is what I'm trying to say is that where is these guys holding each other accountable? It's like, why are you okay with having your group, be done like this? And again, I guess what I'm coming back to is like the system in which you betray in some way, what is best and good and decent. And one thing the system does not understand is that love and solidarity and bond between survivors. Right. And that's why we've been such a threat to them, because what is more important, okay? Is it being ostracized? Is it having no one believe you? Is it being, running around town like I had for so many years, like I'm a crazed man? What is it? And I tell you what's most important, and we all know what it is. I think we all know what it is. It's standing in the truth. That's what's most important. And ironically, the person or story that a lot of us grew up with that told us about this standing in the truth was, of course, Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, he's not following all the rules, right? I mean, he's hanging out with prostitutes. If you look at the narrative, he's doing a lot of things that people are questioning, but yet he's trying to maintain the ideal. He's ideally sticking to, at least the narrative says he's sticking to his guns.
When we flyer at a parish, right, we'll often have done that where there's a priest that has been acknowledged, okay, because everything we do is always with the absolute certainty that that individual committed that act. He's been prosecuted. He's had victims come forward. We never do, because you can imagine we're being gunned for all the time, right? Any mistake you make, any error you make, okay? So once that's been identified, we'll go to a parish and we'll flyer after church, group of us, right? And to let people know, this guy's been here. If you know anybody that's been harmed, etc., here's information to get help. Here's a number for law enforcement, et cetera, right? And it's really been interesting over the, to get into that kind of a situation where you're like flyering this, all the different reactions you get. But one of the things that I commonly get from Catholics, and a lot of us support us. A lot of them support us. They got to whisper it to us, though. They got to, not everybody else know. But one thing I'll often hear gets to this point is very sort of defiant, sort of this has not made me lose my faith. This has not, made me lose my faith. And I always say to someone who tells me that, it's great where you succeeded where Christ failed.
What do you mean by that?
Because Christ lost his faith.
You mean on why have you forsaken me? Do you mean on the cross?
That's exactly right. In fact, I would say any kind of authentic entry into the church begins with your loss of faith. Losing your faith and losing your hope is not a problem in Christianity. Okay? And it's like, we can quote St. Paul. I mean, faith is great and hope is great, but he does say there's something more important than that. And that's what I'm trying to get at here. That love is more important than that.
Right.
But this kind of pride, that again, we succeeded where Christ failed. And to me, it's the loss of faith. It's the loss of God that is the true revelation of Christianity.
Oh, so
in a sense, I could say
at it backwards.
Well, let's go into the past. But more, I mean, I would say in a way, Christianity is sort of the true religion of atheism, contradictorily.
I've never heard that before.
The problem,
say that again for the folks. Say that again. One of you paraphrase it. Go.
Well, it was his quote. I mean, I'm not going
to that Christianity is the true religion of atheism. See, the problem is not that God is dead; is that He doesn't know it.
Right.
See, and it's like I don't want to tell him. It's like you tell him. So I'm not going to tell him.
Go ahead and tell. You brought it up, so tell us your journey. How did this affect your faith? Are you still a Catholic? Are you still a believer? Where are you at with that?
My thing is always about the mission. What do we got to do to get the mission done? And if being a Catholic at that moment gets the mission done, then I'm Joe Catholic. If getting in the front pew of the cathedral, which I've done, if that's going to move the mission forward, that's where I'll be. If not being there, that's where I'll be. I mean,
that's empathy.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's just not a relevant question. It's just not important.
Mm-hmm.
What I am is not important. Here's what's important. In those bankruptcy files, there are 575 cases that were filed, very detailed, about clergy and others, because some are teachers, like lay teachers, things like that have alleged to have raped and sexually assaulted these victims. These are direct victim reports, right?
Yes.
All right. In those reports, now the Archdiocese says that they have revealed all the individuals that they say, they call it substantiation, that they've substantiated under their internal investigation have assaulted children, That list is like 45 or something like that. They will not include religious order priests, like the priest that assaulted me, even though that's half the clerics of the Archdiocese, because they don't have to, apparently. So there's half, they're not on there at all.
Legal loophole.
Right. But in that bankruptcy filing, okay, which by the way, the judge has sealed, it's secret, okay, in those files, there are at least 100 never before named and identified child molesters. And it's sitting there. And the only people who have that information, apparently, is the Archdiocese. Because I know that's the group the management team I would want to entrust this information with. So that's what really counts. It's like, whether I'm Catholic or you are, it does literally is of no importance. What's important in this issue is, what are we going to do to stop the next assault? If you're going to be part of that, then we're all on the same team. Okay, let's go.
Great answer. You're listening to the Mythicist Milwaukee show. We're with Peter Isely from SNAP, and we are moving on into a second hour because the conversation is so fascinating. Hopefully you're back on listening live. If not, the entire interview will be available as one edited unit, I believe, on YouTube and iTunes afterwards. So you can look for the archive and see this or listen to this entire interview, which has really already blown me away in its in its scope. He's Peter Isely from the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. Did you see the movie? Are you a fan? Was there issues with it?
It's because I thought isn't that why they're talking to me about the movie? I'm down here.
We're getting
I feel like I had lunch with the director in New York a couple months ago, Tom McCarthy, who's terrific. The guy is great. We talked a lot about this, several hours together. I've known about this film, known for a long time. It's been happening. I can't see the film. I haven't seen the film.
You have not.
It's like, there's a couple reasons why. One is I don't need to.
Sure.
Right.
It's like, let's bring the Vietnam veterans to watch Platoon.
Right, yeah. Great.
They've seen it.
Lived it.
Yeah, right. There's really no. But the other thing is, like, I think I'll just get really pissed.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to get really angry. And the other part about it is I like to hear people's reaction to it, because I think no matter what you think you're saying, it's not up to you what you're saying.
Sure.
Okay, it's going to be up to somebody else, which is one of the great frustrations or good things about human language. And it's been interesting, the reaction, because it's like, I know the film, and I knew the film was going to be top drawer. I mean, it was going to be fantastic writing and directing and everything else. But what is the effect of the film? And it's sort of like had this sort of non-effect. I mean, it's like it's a good film. I liked it. But it's like, that's it. It's like, I don't know if people don't know what to do with this thing. Part of it was like this nostalgia, because when journalists love the film, of course, because it's about them.
Right.
And again, this is not to say anything about the film, because I haven't seen it. But one of the things that sort of bothered me about the reaction was like comparing it to All the President's Men. Now, All the President's Men is a great film. I love All the President's Men, right? But the myth of All the President's Men is two guys can take down the system. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right.
And I want that to be true. I think a lot of what we've done at SNAP is based upon this romantic idea, but it's not true. Okay, two guys can't take down the system. By the way, they didn't take down the system, and this thing about the Boston Globe didn't take down the Archdiocese of Boston. So I'm not saying it's saying that, but there was almost like a nostalgia about it. Like, these are the good old days of journalism when we sort of did, And even the poster someone pointed out to me is a 1970s kind of a kind of a retro sort of thing. So, this is just in general, right? Organizing a collective movement has become extremely difficult, if seemingly impossible, these days. And that's what's dangerous about this sort of heroic idea of the heroic individual who takes down a system, or someone comes forward and the whole system tumbles and stuff like that. That's not how change happens. And which is why, and I love Batman. You can see the Batman watch. Superheroes can never, ever seem to be able to organize a collective movement.
That's true.
This is the limits of heroism.
In fact, he's going to fight Superman in the next film.
Right.
I can't even get those two together. It's Superman versus Batman.
I mean, the thing is, Aristotle once wrote that you don't have to be a good person to be a good citizen.
Okay.
And that I am 100% behind that, because it's like, that's why I say we shouldn't have to rely upon heroes in order to stop sexually assaultive clergy or anybody else.
Yeah.
Shouldn't rely upon heroes. For God's sakes, you don't want your child someday to have to, if something's going to happen or something's in their harm's way, that they have to rely upon some heroic action of somebody, because most of us Okay. And it's really not a complaint about us human beings. I'm not being cynical about it. It's like most of us are going to go along one way or the other. We're going to find a way out.
Sure.
So that's why I keep emphasizing this. Changing the law, making the law so that it is just and fair with religious organizations, right? Holding them accountable as other organizations, that they have to be good citizens like everybody else, okay? No matter what they believe. And they should be grateful to secularism or even the frame of atheism so they can all disagree and fight each other and try to cancel each other out. I mean, they wouldn't be able to do that if it wasn't for that overall frame, okay, that puts them in it so they can do that kind of stuff. So that's what I mean. Those laws have to change. And church law, church rules have to be changed. And there's no reason, given church, in my opinion, teaching and practice and theology, that it can't.
Right.
I mean, I don't think it's impossible for it to change.
Well, this brings up a good question. Like, what do you think is the end game? If you, for example, were appointed as an advisor to the Vatican, where do you think the finish line is? Also, what can the Catholic laity do? Just the average Catholic laity do to support, or the folks that don't identify like us, the seculars? Like, what do you think about those three?
Well, advisor to the Vatican, that sounds pretty good.
Plenipotentiary.
Right, I'm sure it would be brought into some secret cavern in some back room of the Vatican.
Given a funny hat.
Exactly. On your head.
Right, exactly. Again, I think things live at the level of the law. And so my number one priority with the Vatican, and it's the number one thing they're fighting, would be to change their law. It means that they are putting a limit and a wall, as it were, on what the priesthood means and what ordination means. That there is something, like when it comes to the rape of children, other kinds of conduct, that removes your ordination. Now, you and I are sitting here, probably, I'm thinking you're thinking here, well, what's the big deal about that? Why is that so hard? Other occupations, let me put it this way. Plato, if you read the Republic, he talks about two types of occupations in society, right? He talks about guardian occupations, which are like the military, judges, lawyers, doctors, say.
Fire police.
Right, exactly. And then commercial occupations, right? And these two occupations are different. They have a different set of morality in a way. And I'm not the one who came up with this. If you read the Two Systems of Morality, you know what I'm talking about. And I'm blocking her name. But the point is that when you look at guardian occupations, every one of those occupations take an oath, a public oath.
Yes.
Why? Because they have to be trusted.
Yes.
They don't have supervisors. You can't supervise these people, okay? If they break the public trust, they have to be removed from that occupation.
Yeah.
Again,
higher
why?
ethical obligation.
But yeah, but not. I wouldn't even say it's a higher. I would not say it's a higher ethical obligation. I think that's what they say. It's no more. They have no more of an ethical obligation than somebody in a commercial occupation. They're both citizens. It's the nature of their work. So I'm a psychotherapist. I'm not. I don't have some higher ethical obligation than you two. Okay. What I have is that in order to do my work, it requires a very high level of confidentiality and privacy. And the nature, the unequal power in that relationship, requires that, okay? So if I break that, what are you going to do? Watch my, I'm going to crack the door open to my therapy room so that you can see okay, that's insane.
Right.
If I've been known to abuse and misuse that therapeutic relationship as a therapist with sexual contact with a patient, for instance, my license is revoked, period. It's actually a felony crime in Wisconsin to do that. Okay, you can do it as a priest, by the way, the very same thing. But you can't do it as a therapist. So I'm saying is that the nature of the work requires it. And what Plato talked about was interesting. He talked about the honor of the group, the honor of the occupation. So if you're a district attorney and you tell me, yeah, we've got one of our members of our DA's office, one of our DAs has been taking bribes. We just moved him to another desk. We're not going to tell you who he is. You'd be like, you would have no confidence or trust in that office, would you? If you go to your bank and your teller has embezzled money, and it's like
red flag,
right? But it's not that they're horrible human beings to be condemned for all time. It's that it's not an entitlement. They can't. You cannot trust the group of tellers if you've got somebody.
I wonder about the oversight now.
Right, exactly. And so for the group to do its work, okay, it has to enforce what I'm talking about.
Right.
Or else everybody in that group, everybody in that occupation gets painted with a broad brush. And guess what? They should.
Right.
So this guilt that the church leaders have tried to put on people, like, oh, everybody thinks, a priest is a pedophile. And sure, priest pedophile, that has almost become one word now, right? Sure. It's interesting. Mm-hmm. And they're responsible for that, incidentally. But it's like, okay, if I find out that you've been moving a priest around that has assaulted children, that you have a pattern and practice of doing that, or you're not coming clean about it, if I have any sense, what question am I going to have in my mind? Is my pastor, has he done this? Okay? And so again, they're trying to make people feel guilty about this. The whole group is guilty until they change and fix what I'm talking about.
So there's some overlay here with what's going on with the police, perhaps the professional courtesy getting involved, and now it affects the whole.
Exactly. And there you have like a classic guardian occupation. It's interesting that a lot of these are typically all male, or seen that way too. But the very same values, ethics, let's say, loyalty, things like that bind the group together, they can turn and become really the opposite and very dangerous. That same loyalty that might have one police officer, take a bullet for another one, is also the same loyalty that is going to have them not report when that police officer has misused force and killed or harmed a civilian. See what I mean? Right. It's the same thing. That's why
what can be good can be bad.
It can turn on you. And a lot of this, ultimately, like with the church, is what comes down to money. Once you have commercial values infecting guardian occupations, that's one argument that can be made. Then you begin to really go bad. And then some people could argue the opposite. When you have guardian occupations infecting commercial occupations, like in the old Soviet Union, back to them with their 5-year plans.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Let's determine how many nails we're going to need this year.
Yeah. What's the movie? Nikita or whatever, the great
Nikita.
Nikita. Right. Ernst Lubitsch. There's a line in there where he says something like, I love your. I really admire your 5-year plans. I've been studying for 10 years.
And it goes to the heart of separation of church and state. I took that away from the movie, too. The fact that, and I grew up in the country, and if you grew up in the country, Catholics are kind of marginalized. But if you grew up around an urban area with an immigrant population, it can seem like the whole world is Catholic to you. And I grew up close to Boston, but you get a sense from the movie of just how deeply entrenched the Catholic Church is in every aspect of daily life in a city like Boston, to where they can go, some representative from the church or some unseen hand can reach down into the courthouse and take physical documents and hide. This is nothing if not a gigantic abuse of the separation clause.
You're looking at me and I'm like, separation of what and what,
Church and state. I mean, it's
really,
it's a notion, not a reality.
But not for the church. I mean, if these are Branch Davidians or these were snake handlers down at whatever, you think the Justice Department wouldn't be all over them? I mean, we have put together some years ago. We put together a white paper for the Justice Department, the DOJ, right? Talking about why this hasn't been investigated. There has not been a Justice Department nationwide Justice Department investigation. You got screaming headlines for years, okay, about child rape and sexual abuse taking place in this organization, right? Not one investigation, nationwide investigation.
That's a good point.
And you've got. They have now acknowledged, they've admitted under their own files that they have reviewed, that there has been like 6,400 and some priests that have raped or sexually assaulted children in the United States alone over the past decades. 6,400 and some. That's not alleged. That is confirmed.
Right.
With all this. Okay. So I'm like, okay, you've got 6,000 and some. That's unbelievable number. Okay. They were all moved. All of them, almost all of them were moved from parishes to schools. Some of them, a number of them were moved across state lines.
Yes.
A number of them were moved across international boundaries. And nobody's interested in finding out about this. And what they did is that when the stuff started coming out in the late 80s, the first stories, is that they began to set up their own, quote, retreat house and treatment facilities.
Right.
Where they would then launder these offenders. If they would get caught somewhere, they would put them on ice, take them out of the state, get the information, put them on ice for 6 months, give them therapy, spend
Mm-hmm.
hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars on this nonsense, and then put them back in somewhere
Right.
else to do it. So I'm saying you've got these collection points, and all those therapy places and retreat houses, those country
Yes.
kind of place, they've got all the information. They've been getting all that. So it's like, gee whiz, the Department of Justice, Attorney General, wouldn't you be interested
Right.
in
Indeed.
getting in there and finding out what's in there? It's just fascinating. So there's been no hearings on Capitol Hill about any of this ever. Not one hearing. They have a hearing on Capitol Hill. Right? I mean, like the hearings that Ted Cruz have had, what he's had for the last,
Right.
I mean, the
Right.
nonsense.
Hillary's emails.
Anybody can do it better than that. I mean, this is the most nonsensical nonsense because I'll just have a hearing. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Not one. So again, I would, and by the way, talk about church and state. We have an ambassador to the Vatican.
Ah,
We have an
didn't know that.
ambassador because we recognize the Vatican as a sovereign state, which is incredible. Think about this once, okay? Now, most people, when they see this or hear this, they think, oh, they're kind of like some sort of gigantic Red Cross or something. The
Right.
holy, like some sort of like, and that's part of what they do. And I think that one of the things that makes this so difficult for people is that the Catholic Church is there's a billion people that say they're Catholic. That's like
Right.
a lot of people. Okay.
It is.
And it's like centuries old, and it's got some pretty impressive architecture and other things. And like any painting before the 17th century, they're in every one.
They're in every one.
Okay,
They
so,
did.
I mean, it's hard to just kind of dislodge them from. But what I'm saying is that, okay, so people have an experience of the church, and part of that experience often is good, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then there's this thing that's bad, but it's also good, but it's bad, but it's good, but it's bad. And untangling what's good from bad is extremely difficult to
Yes.
do, and especially when your leadership isn't requiring you to do it at all, and they're not doing it, and everybody's in on this, let's not do this, because it is really a complex mess. So you can just I'll stick to what's good about it. That's what I think a lot of Catholics do. I'll just sort of connect to what's good, okay, and just God will take care of the rest or
Right.
something. Sort of like when in with the slaughter in was it in Mexico, where the famous line where the cardinal said, whatever he says, they're going to besiege the city and all these people are going to get slaughtered. And he's like, well, we baptized a bunch of them. We were there before. And I think a lot of them are baptized. And the guy says, whatever, the cardinal with him, says, they're like, what are we going to do? And he says, well, just kill them all and then God will sort them out
Yes.
afterwards.
Right, sort
So
them
that
out
kind,
later,
of a thing. It's like he'll just sort of sort them out afterwards. But, it's I guess what I'm trying to say is that you've got more than just evidence. I mean, you have them even acknowledging and admitting to some extent that they were involved in this conduct and behavior. And our Justice Department is not interested at all. I mean, let's take Dolan Cemetery thing,
Yeah.
okay? I was saying before, you never get a smoking gun like that with fraud. And you don't need it to prosecute fraud because it would be ridiculous to have. That someone would have to say, I've got a tape with him saying, I'm going to go and steal this money or rip this off or write it down. Okay. But here, you have something that you never get. It's so rare. You actually have the guy writing it down. And that's not enough. That's not sufficient. And so if that's not a interference, because I would say that this hampers the practice of religion.
Yeah.
This very entanglement. This is the entanglement. Okay. And it hampers the free exercise of religion. Children, let me put it this way. Children have a right. It's like, I didn't have a choice about being taken to church when I was a kid.
That's right.
All right. And you have to trust your parents. You do.
Right.
Okay. So it's like, what did I know? I didn't have a choice. That's why it's so important that they follow the laws around this. But
Right.
children have a right, do they not, to worship God, whatever that means, without the threat of being raped or sexually assaulted inside their church. Is that not a right as well? Why isn't their right to be able to pray to their God as children? Why isn't that so important that it should be protected. They should be protected from physical or sexual
An
assault.
inalienable right.
It's a
You
good
would
question.
think.
It's
You
a good
would
question.
think. Apparently, it's really worshiping God is really not that important.
I know, and I can imagine you as the 7-year-old boy, you know, with this booming voice being told that you're a priest, because I also remember being an altar boy, and you were an altar boy much earlier. It took me to 11 before I got that. But the respect that you have to go in, I remember going in thinking how straight my shoulders need to be. I mean, that to have these people potentially preying on you when you were taught and ingrained to have this respect, that it's really something else. And especially the sacraments themselves, they feel powerful. So to have them abused in any way, it's just...
Well, these are it's hard to kind of for me to think about it now, but I mean, these rituals are ancient, right? I mean, whatever you think about them, something is being communicated by the group or whatever's going on. Okay,
It works in its way, yeah.
They're extremely powerful. I don't think you can just easily just write them off.
Right.
Okay. And a lot of people in our society would, they often, if it's from the East, if it's Buddhism or something, then it's okay. Then it's like, I often wonder if you go to a generally Buddhist country, if they have crucifixes and stuff just in their house for like display.
Right.
If they have like Christian items there. Oh, it's like really, we went down to IKEA and got some crucifixes. But my point is, and by the way, that's interesting to think too about that. Maybe this has nothing to do with anything. But if you've read the Bhagavad Gita, there's getting into religion, right? Because I guess my point I'm trying to make here is that religion, I guess I see it as an ethically neutral instrument. So how you pick up those symbols and how you use them is what counts. The civil rights movement in the United States, which I think is arguably the most successful and certainly the most moral, powerful movement in the United States history, I think. That was a Christian movement. That came from fundamentalist, what we would call fundamentalist Christian congregations. So I think this idea that religion can only be deployed in one way is not true.
Right.
Like I said, it's ethically neutral. I mean, Gandhi's favorite text was the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, right? And it's an amazing work. And it's also the text that was a great inspiration, and I think he always had it in his pocket, of Himmler, Heinrich Himmler. And it's like, when you look at this text, what's really interesting about it is that there's a line in there where it's like, it's basically, I'm not doing the killing, the sword is doing the killing. It's like the victim appears.
Okay.
And who's Alan Watts, the professor who ended up at Columbia, and became in the 60s and 70s. He was actually how Zen was used as a support for the Japanese militarism and racism.
Yeah.
That led up to World War II. And he has a quote during that time where he talks about, it's like, I'm not doing the killing. It's like the victim is appearing to be killed.
Yeah, you've run into my fist.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. The sword, because I'm detached from the results, from the fruits of my action. See what I mean? And that is a perverse orientation. That is a perverse position. But it's interesting and gives a lot of pause, I think, to think that the same text can be read by Gandhi and can be read by Himmler.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the
and
leader of the SS.
They both can find inspiration and direction from the same religious text.
Right. And I think that you're right. So I think you're asserting that religion can be used in a good way, but it's easy to go too far. Because some would make the claim that Martin Luther King was more secular than anything else, but being on the pulpit and this coming from a religious voice, and nobody could deny it. They had to be heard. So in that way, I do think that it was a good vehicle.
Well, I mean, I guess my point, maybe the pragmatics of this is, I don't want someone to think, well, I have to leave the Catholic Church.
Right.
And a lot of them have left, And that's really understandable. I mean, like, no kidding. But the people who could change things also left.
Sure.
Okay? So it's like, and you left this history behind.
You could be victims of a sort.
But I mean, you left this history behind. I remember when I was at the seminary, and they had a number of pedophiles there at the time, right? That these guys would leave the seminary. They'd leave the priesthood, right? and they'd leave us there.
Right.
It's like, well, that's good for you. I mean, you grew up in I'm just saying that this is if you're part of that institution, no matter what you think about it, in some way, this is part of your history.
Right.
And it's coming to terms with your history. So I don't want people to think, well, in order for me to not, in order for this to stop, in order for these things to change, and I'm talking about, I have to leave the Catholic Church.
Right.
It's like, I want to find a way that you can stay Catholic and actually,
I'm with you there.
Admittedly, it's challenging, but I'm trying to be pragmatic about it. Like if our message is the only way this is going to end is if the Catholic Church ends. Okay. I'm not,
Right.
Banging your head against the wall.
Right. Exactly. But on the other hand, if I can say there is so much within your tradition and history and practice, including in canon law, by the way, which can be used to support and initiate change and reform, which there is. It's there. I believe it's there. And I believe it's in the story of Christ as well. I think they have everything they need to do that. Then you need to pick that up, okay, especially if you're claiming to practice your faith. And you need to use that, and you need to change things. That's what I would like to be able to tell them.
You're listening to the Mythicist Milwaukee Show, a bonus edition here. So fascinating is our talk with Peter Isely from SNAP, the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. He is a psychotherapist here in Milwaukee, and I have a million questions. We could keep on going. I think part of what people need to realize is that, and this goes along with the apathy that comes normally to most people, the scandal's been exposed, but the abuse is not ended, has it? And we'd be naive to think that any of what has transpired has actually brought an end to the abuse. Isn't that true, Peter?
It's kind of, it's hard to, where does one begin? I mean, it's like, because I'm just wrapping my mind around this as well as this thing unfolds over the years, right, where we are now. Because it's like, if you really want to, the really big time crimes, it seems to me, and this is part of what I've learned from this, is like, it's one thing to like just be a criminal, who I have nothing but now tremendous respect for. It's just like, compare the person who tries to steal some money to what Dolan did. Okay? And that person's thrown in jail or whatever, and Dolan's sitting on the throne in New York. And it's right. If you want to really be a criminal, what you do is that you make your crime legal first. That's what you do. You hire a lot of lobbyists, you get a lot of money, and then you change the law and the rules so that you can then legally do your illegal thing. I mean, it's like what I see the response, especially here in Wisconsin, and I think ironically it's been in part because of the success of exposing it. You think, as I was telling someone, when you're successful at something like this, that we've been at this, that's going to engender a response, like a very strong and possibly insidious response. And it's like that rule, that Wisconsin State Supreme Court ruling, which is horrible. Okay, that you can't sue, whatever. The church, yeah. Right? It can't sue a pedophile, and it immunizes the church, right? And they had a further ruling they had to add onto that later on, which is even more absurd, that you cannot bring a suit, not just against clergy, but they had to also include non-blood relatives. Okay. Yeah, I know. It's unbelievable. This all lives in this minutia, right? We're all in the weeds now, right? This is where, if you want to say what evil looks like, it looks like this. Okay. And that ruling would never have happened if it wasn't for our success in exposing these crimes. See what I mean? So I don't know what to do about that. Clergy, there are 30 professions that are obligated under Wisconsin law, as in most states, to report sexual assault of children. Okay, if they come across it or knowledge about it in the course of their professional duties, they are obligated, they're mandatory reporters. Okay? Now, it said you got to make a law to make a doctor or a therapist or somebody like that report child rape. But, okay, it's a law. Okay. Clergy have fought successfully to keep themselves off this law. Okay? That they never are under a mandatory obligation to report. When the scandal re-erupted, and I can tell you it re-erupted. Yeah. It had already erupted before, but it re-erupted in Boston and then spread everywhere else again in 2002, and we were all back in it. State lawmakers here, instead of changing the statute of limitations that would have allowed victims to come forward and file suits, said, we're going to make the church into mandatory reporters. So we don't need to do this. Okay. There was a lot of visibility on this. If you read that law that they, again, had successfully fought for 10 years, I can remember Feingold's sister, and I love Feingold, right? She's a rabbi. This is in 1992 when we were trying to change this law, saying this law we do not need mandatory. It's an entanglement. I can't imagine under any circumstances a minister or rabbi or priest not reporting. But I'm the naive one. Wow. My thing is like, look, when they made this law, this is the Wisconsin law as it stands right now. Clergy have been placed as mandatory reporters, except, okay, there's an asterisk, okay, except when they find out about it in the course of their pastoral duties.
It's the same thing as the confessional thing.
No, it's more than a confession. It covers everything.
Yeah.
It's saying if I'm a social worker, I have to report sexual abuse of children unless I find out about it as a social worker. Right. So, but that wasn't enough for them, because when you've got the juice hookup in the back room, you're like, we're not only going to change this law to make it good for us, we're going to take this scandalous situation, whatever that's going on, because it'll go away, and we're going to make a law that's going to make it even better and easier for us to cover it up. Because there's a second sentence to that law in Wisconsin, which is, so if you find out about it as a clergyman, then you don't have to report it.
Right.
So I guess you got to be, well, even the Good Samaritan, but they didn't report it, right? But it's like, or, second sentence, if the tenets, practices, or tradition of your church require secrecy.
Claiming First Amendment privilege.
Secrecy. I can't even get it out. This is a law about mandatory reporting of child sex abuse. And you've got a secrecy provision in it to not report for clergy.
It's just a moot law.
So it's worse than what? And what I'm saying is that it's worse than that. It's like, again, back to Immanuel Kant, not to use it the way Eichmann did, but he said there's a short distance from I can to I must. Mm-hmm. The law is actually, I would argue, is actually enjoining you not to report it. Okay? It's actually inciting you not to report it. Just because this archdiocese and all the dioceses in this state, there's under no circumstance will this archbishop or any priest ever have to report child sex abuse or cover up. They'll never be prosecuted for it under this law, ever. So that means they can continue to do it with impunity if that's what they want to do.
The best criminals make their crimes legal. Again,
that's what I meant. That's exactly. We've now, instead of, so it was actually in a way better before than it is now. Because now you can cite the law as your reason for not reporting.
I did not see that through. Again, this is why this is not being reported well. I Googled this extensively, and I consider myself the Google whisperer, and I did not see that.
We're talking to Peter Isely, and we do have to wrap it up. We're going on an hour and 40 minutes of fantastic chat. I'm blown away as all the listeners and the comments coming in are by the scope of this and your knowledge as it relates to this. We want to hit you with a couple of questions before we wrap it up. It's important to acknowledge abuse by, or victims of abuse by other clergy. This is not just a Catholic problem, and is SNAP open to those abused by the Baptist minister? Oh yeah, in fact we have a very active chapter of survivors of Baptist, and that whole thing, SNAB,
and Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts,
Wow.
Right. And there's a couple things. One is the Catholic Church is particularly good at this. And what I mean by that is that it's a system. I ran a treatment center for victims, adults as victimized as children. And this is like the worst cases, right? Suicide, things like that. And they came from all over the country. Victims abused by rabbis, by Protestant ministers, etc. And it's kind of like when it comes to your rape, it doesn't make a difference. That's what I'm saying. Sure. But it's a different dynamic with the Catholic Church. The Protestant, the way the Protestants have lay participation, what we would call in the lay participation, they have to. I went to Harvard Divinity School, and we had every denomination and faith at the school. It was a tremendous place to go to. The Center for Study of World Religions was there. And we Catholics were the largest denomination, which would make the founders of the Harvard really like roll in their grave.
Right.
But because we had like nowhere to go.
Sure.
And all these other people from their denominations, they were going to Harvard Divinity School and they were getting their schooling at their other divinity schools in town in Boston, and they were going to become ordained ministers. And it was so fascinating to see the process they had to go through. They had to go and get the approval of a congregation. They had to be interviewed. They had to do a homily. They had to do all this kind of stuff because the congregation had significant, if not total control over the hiring and firing of that minister.
Voting rights.
Right, exactly. And so when you have a minister who has this sort of, these sex offender, pedophile ministers who have this sort of charismatic hold on a congregation, and that the denominational rules, it's different, right? In the Catholic Church, you can yank a priest out. You've got nothing to do with that congregation. Right, it doesn't matter.
You have no vote.
Right, exactly. And it's like, and then he's gone. They're totally accommodated to this system where it's literally top down.
Yes.
And so you have, they would like yank a guy and then make up some bullshit lie about why he's gone.
Right, put him on sick leave.
And the unwritten rule is that you don't ask questions. You know what I mean? That everybody understands in the Catholic Church. It's like a family. Everybody knows what the unwritten rules are. The unwritten rule is much more powerful than the written rules. And so you don't ask certain questions.
Right.
You don't do this, you don't do that. And it's like, that's how it is. So it's like, then they bring a guy in, they take a guy out, stuff like that. Now that's that kind of like accommodation that Catholic lay people have in this organization. Like, what are they getting out of this? This is my challenge to Catholics. What kind of satisfaction or enjoyment, probably unconscious, that you're getting out of this? Why do you want to over-obey?
Right.
Okay, because it's not just obeying that is my problem. It's over-obeying. Okay. And it's like this sacrifice.
Yeah.
Like we're going to sacrifice, and there's this enjoyment in sacrifice is what I'm trying to say.
That's
Okay,
very
we're
Catholic.
into
That
deep
is very
psychoanalytic
Catholic,
categories here. But you've got a system that is in some ways also makes it more important as far as exposing this problem in general, because you have a system in which you can see it operating with much greater clarity, and you can see how it is systematic and widespread. And so in that way, the Catholic Church has a real opportunity constantly and a responsibility to really, if they step forward on this, to have a huge impact globally on kids who are getting harmed in families and in organizations around the world. Think about it. If you've been in Rome, as I have been, you see the chair of St. Peter. That's an unbelievably powerful spokesperson chair. Okay? I mean, that's like, wow, all right? And my thing is like, that chair can be used just as effectively to uncover sexual abuse of children as it can be used to cover it up.
Well said.
I want you to brag on your treatment program that you started. It's unique in the country. Is that true?
Well, yeah, it's not operating now.
Oh,
It was operated in the 90s. I had to make a decision about either being a therapist, a clinician, working with victims in this sort of setting, or being an advocate or activist. And I had to sort of like, okay, what's it going to be? And so I decided to make that decision to be an activist. But I do have I see victims. I have a treatment. My own clinical program, my own clinical work is just ordinary misery. That is my that is my enjoyment.
Sure.
If you want to come and see me for full fee, I can tell you. Both of you definitely need help.
Okay.
And
good observer.
You're going to pay. You're going to pay.
How much an hour?
Just good old fashioned misery.
On the couch, misery.
Right. Confusion.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm all about it.
Give me a lollipop.
But I think what you see, what I saw in that program, and it was so powerful, was, and I don't think, you need to probably explain this, but I mean, the extent of the wound that this creates in a person. What is delivered by the nature of this abuse. And to a person, most victims will tell you it's not the perpetrator. I've come to terms with that. It's the church. It's almost like what gets delivered in torture. In some of these cases, including what happened to me, rises to the level of torture under the UN. And we've been to the UN, and the Committee on Torture, the Committee for the Child, both of those committees have issued stinging reports to the Vatican about their cover-up and conduct, right? Because they're signatories. There's signatories on there. They've got to go back
next year, I think, and to explain why they're not following the provisions of these treaties.
Wow.
And that includes torture. And they're in there saying, we only run the Vatican State. That's all we're responsible for. That's all the Pope is responsible for. The 7,000 people running around the Vatican, and we don't have an abuse problem there, which I would challenge because I think they probably do. But I mean, that's what they're coming in and saying. The Pope has when we all know, everybody knows that ultimately only the Pope can hire and fire a priest, by the way. And the Pope has complete power over clergy. Yes, but this is what I mean. They're in there doing this kind of, and so, when I look at this, it's sort of like state-sponsored terror in a way. Mm-hmm. That when you're being tortured by the individuals who are instruments of the state, in a way, this is kind of what happens when you have children being raped and assaulted within religious organizations and churches and stuff like that. And that message, that social message that gets delivered, makes it extremely complicated and difficult to recover from. And then when you see, like I have to, like we all have to, I have to drive by here, I get to see the Rembert Weekland Center down at the cathedral with his name. Sure. I got to see, chapels and steeples everywhere. You know what I mean? It's not like a situation, well, it's over. You know what I mean? The regime is gone.
Right.
And we're sort of dealing with this. We have an organization, and I've described these laws to you, in which they are still very actively involved, in elements of this activity, Elements of the cover-up are still in place. Mm-hmm. Elements of that process and practice are still in place, right? And they have not been brought fully into the law. They have not been, and the law has said to them, like with this bankruptcy, you don't have to. We're not going to make you do that. You found a way to negotiate it into this arena. I mean, you got rape victims in bankruptcy court as creditors. I mean, how absurd is that? Okay.
I'm not sure how that happened. And now, they're turning the page. But juxtapose this against the child rape scandal at Penn State, which you do see a regime change. I mean, the statue of Joe Paterno, who's beloved, right? They actually took away his wins, so he's not the winningest coach. They took the statue down. I mean, this seems like.
Well, it's interesting with that. They actually put his wins back.
That's the thing.
The what? They put his wins back.
I would challenge that.
Oh, did they?
They
put him back.
The culture there has not changed significantly.
And you know why? Because again, it's this institutional response. We're going to give a bunch of money to victims organizations, blah bullshit. But the thing is, it's like what's interesting with that Paterno, he was so Catholic too.
Yeah, that's great. Right?
The Catholic Center at Penn State is named after his wife, I think. So it's like so interesting, right? And that diocese he belongs to had, of course, a number of pedophile priests, which I'm sure he knew. But it was interesting. I agree partly what you're saying. There was this response in which the organization, the institution, in part for its own economic danger to it, like we're going to make a complete cut with the past. But I think what your colleague here is saying is that in some way they haven't made a cut with the past. There's still
football is still God there.
It's not just the football. It's that they got these wins back, which but the thing is, like you have this unwritten approval that students were given, starting from Paterno himself, how he responded to it, which gave them permission.
Right.
Similar. Exactly. And so, you can make any kind of policy change, that you want, because, that's how we cover things up now with commission. I think Reagan was the one who invented this idea, which is like, what we're going to do is that we're getting caught at something. So we're going to impanel a commission to look at it. That should give us at least 3 to 6 months for this to go away, for us to spin how this is going to happen, right? And so that's why when you see with the Catholic Church, what you see now, and I would argue with this Pope, is new school. I mean, Benedict was old school.
Right.
And it was like, oh God, this is not working. You know what I mean? They don't like us. We got to tone it down. So what you have is like new school, and this is new school cover-up. Francis is the new school authoritarian. He's new school authority. He's the one, he's the nice CEO. He's God's middle manager. He's a good guy. It's like, I met with him and he had lunch. We were going to have lunch. He brought a brown bag with a bologna sandwich and an apple.
This is a true story?
No, but it could be. It could be. Exactly. Because why? Because it's like the CEO who's like, it's dress down Fridays.
I can have a beer with him.
I want to hear what you have to say. I want to, I'm just like you. And I'm like, well, no, you're actually not like me. You're the CEO. Right. But, I've got to go along with, he's a good guy. He's just like, and again, I think there are good things about Francis. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. But it's like the fact that he doesn't sit on a gold throne because that's not his style. It's not. Right. He didn't give the gold away. Okay, the throne was put into the warehouse. It was not. So I don't think ultimately he's a threat to global capital. His thing is like, why is this? Well, we got to be less greedy. It's like, yeah, you're right. I look inside my soul. I could be a little less selfish. That's going to bring an end to global warming.
Right.
Okay, it's not. That's what I'm saying. Okay, there is a lot of investment in keeping things the way they are, and I think they were smart enough to realize a faction among the Cardinals that they need to change and come up to date.
Which is why Ratzinger was
That was an ugly choice from the beginning, wasn't it?
Well, but I kind of wish he was still there, because under Ratzinger, and I don't know if you read about his brother too, has been implicated in this choir that he had run. But under Ratzinger, the contradictions and all these things were coming forward. Mm-hmm. And so like the liberals love Francis. So all of a sudden we don't have an abuse problem anymore. Yeah. It's like, well, we had it, whenever he was elected. We had one on June 9th, an abuse problem, but now on June 10th, it's not so much a problem.
It's like the unwritten rule again.
Exactly.
Because he's cool. It's almost like compare it to, you don't talk about the no-hitter past the fifth inning.
Right. He doesn't make me feel bad about, because I'm just, I have my little sins and I do my little things. He doesn't make me feel bad about it. He's going to let me eat fish on Friday. I like that guy. He's going to let me have fish. He's going to let me enjoy myself.
He's okay with my gay friends.
Right. Exactly.
Right. Atheists can get to heaven.
Right. Now, if your gay friends go somewhere, some country where it's illegal to be gay and they get arrested,
can't help
but
him
I mean,
then,
he's not going to, and he's not going to, and speaking of that, I can remember, one of the first things Dolan said to me when he met with me, because I met with him a lot, one of the first things he said was, we sat down, we're having breakfast, and he said, Pete, what are we going to do about all the gay priests? And I said, well, what are we going to do about all the gay bishops? Wow. But you know what I mean? It's like this whole politics around, I don't have to, here's my thing about Francis, if I make this quick. I'd say, like a lot of patients that come to see me, that come tumbling in your office, okay, they want things to change, but they don't want to be different. Right. Okay. And I respect that. So it's like, they want to like change what's happening with this stuff, but they don't want to, they don't want to, they want things to be different, but they don't want to change. And so they want it to be different around this abuse stuff. They do. I don't think Pope Francis wants kids abused, but they don't want to change this underlying system and these rules that I'm talking about.
They want their cake and eat it too.
Yeah,
that
right.
Makes sense.
I'm
going to have to call an end to this. It's been a fascinating discussion. We're going on 2 hours, and the producers are getting itchy. They have other things they want to do that can't possibly be as interesting as this, but nonetheless, it's been Peter Isely from SNAP. He's the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests on the Mythicist Milwaukee show today. I want to invite everyone to join us next week. Again at 2:00, where we actually have 2 shows next week. Psychologist and author Valerie Tarico will be on the program at 2:00,
Excited.
I think. And then later in the day, back to some bald-faced rank atheism next week with the Cognitive Dissonance podcast crew from Chicago. A couple of wacky guys.
We'll see if we can keep up.
I doubt we can. That'll be a different one for us, since we're mostly scholarly and high-minded in our pursuits here.
Ostensibly.
A little bit of, ostensibly, thank you. A little bit of a departure next week. So join us again next week for the Mythicist Milwaukee show. Peter, thank you so much for joining us. And will you come back?
Absolutely, sure.
I only got to half of my questions, I think, and we could really go on and on. So thanks again to Peter Isely and all the great folks down at the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. He hasn't seen it, but go see Spotlight. It was great. Indeed. And do what you can for this movement. And thanks again for joining us on the Mythicist Milwaukee show. Goodbye, everybody.